trying to answer the question how to choose the right bike frame for my adventures, you should first ask yourself the following questions. What will I be using the bike for? Are you planning to use it as a single day sportive, or are you planning to use it in a multi-day touring ride or ultra distance event? Are you planning to use it for bike packing? It's up to you. For shorter efforts, maybe a lighter bike might be better, but anything more than a day, then I look for something with more comfort rather than lightness. The next question you need to answer is, what terrain will you be riding on? Will you be riding on road, gravel or both? The answer to this question will determine what type of wheels you need, and the wheels, and specifically tyres, are the number one factor of comfort, especially in where you want to ride. It's important to know, and you might be thinking, why the hell are we talking about tyres or start going on a frameset? Well, the reason is the gap between the fork and the frame at the wheels. If you want wide wheels, you need wide gaps so the tyre will fit through. And yes, people think wider tyres will mean you're slower, but it's not necessarily the case. Depends on your terrain. If you're on rough roads, even rough pavement, a wider 28 or even 32mm tyre can actually be fast if you're on 25mm. The reason for this is, as the wheel turns, if it hits small bumps in the road, each of those bumps is like a mini stopping force as the tyre hits it, as the tyre rotates around. But if you have larger tyres with higher volume, it's able to absorb them bumps and it doesn't stop you as much, so you're able to roll over easier. Any wider than that, or even if you are on smooth pavement, it will slow you down at first, but after 100k, maybe 200k, it doesn't make a difference. It's comfort after that. If you're able to keep riding in comfort, you're going to pass the guys that were and pass you earlier on in the day. So now we're going to have a look at bike geometry. Geometry is basically the lengths and angles that bike designers use to create feel and ride of the bike. It will differ for nearly all bikes. There's hundreds of different elements to consider, but there's only really 5 or 6 that really make big effects to you on how you sit on the bike and how the bike feels. And I'm just going to go through some of them now. The first one being reach. Now, reach is the horizontal distance from the bottom bracket to the headset. Setting your saddle in relation to the bottom bracket is pretty simple, as the saddle can be easily adjusted. However, the reach adjustment cannot be changed. Having a long reach will promote a more aggressive riding position, and a short reach will prompt the opposite. That being said, you should take into account your body shape. Some people have longer legs and shorter torso. If that's you, then maybe a short reach will suit you. The next important geometry value is stack. Stack is the vertical distance between the bottom bracket and the top of the head tube. Having a long stack will promote a more upright position. So if we go back to the short leg, long body example, you can still have an aggressive riding position with a long reach and a short stack. So this would be a bit long and then more of a short. Okay? Trail. The next geometry value is trail. Trail of the frame's front fork will have a significant effect on the bike's feel. Having low trail will result in the bike being more twitchy, while the big trail value will offer greater stability in a straight line. But what exactly is trail? Let's try to get a bike out. A kid's bike here. So, it's a kid's bike. Okay, get this demonstrate. So if you look at the head tube, this is the head tube. There's not at the right angle to the ground, okay? It's kicked off like that a bit, okay? So if I look at this, and as you can see, it's not the same angle as the fork. The fork goes forward. But the angle, as this goes down to the ground, try to get it right. Okay. You can see now, as it touches the ground, looking at this part, this is now ahead of the wheel, of the hub. So if I was to draw another line straight down from the hub, straight down, it would be a little bit behind this front part. It would be probably here. And it's that gap that gap that is the trail. Okay, so it's this trail that will affect the handling. The angle of the head tube versus the angle of your forks determine the trail, but they don't actually determine how the bike feels. It's the trail. At the end of the day, it's always the trail. This could be whatever angle you want. The trail that affects the angle, or the feel, sorry. Next, we have bottom bracket drop. This is the distance the bottom bracket is below the bike wheel hubs. Having a lower bottom bracket, meaning a high bottom bracket drop, will allow you to corner better because your centre of gravity will be lower. There can be issues with it going too low. Pedal strike will be an issue if you're on rough terrain or pedaling when you corner, because obviously your pedals will be closer to the ground. So there is a happy medium there. You can get shorter cranks obviously, which I'll speak about in the group set section. Chainstay length. Chainstay length will affect the overall wheelbase of the bike. Having a bike with a short chainstay will cause it to be more nimble, which usually leads to a much more fun bike to ride. However, going too short of a wheelbase will mean that your bike will be a bit sketchy and not as comfortable to ride. So try to find maybe something with a short chainstay but with a long wheelbase, which can be hard to find. And finally, it's the size. The size of the bike is probably the most important for you. If all this talk about geometry has got your head in a bit of a whirl, you don't really need to know it. As I say, bike manufacturers know what they're doing. If the bike's advertised to be a gravel bike or adventure bike, then it's probably going to be pretty good at that. But you need to get the size right. Most reputable brands will have a size guide on the website that will show you how to choose your bike, show you how to measure your inseam, so that from the ground to the inseam, the inside of your groin, and your overall height. So with them two measurements, they should be able to prepare a proper size bike for you. Now we have the size all sorted, we have to look at just the materials of a few different bikes. First one we look at is steel. First thing most people think about when they hear steel bikes is the weight. Now, granted, steel is the heaviest material, but there has been a lot of advancements over the years. Steel is now, makes steel a lot stronger than it used to be, meaning you can use less of it. And the less of it means it's going to be lighter. In fact, it's now possible to get a steel frame that's just as light as a titanium frame. So why don't you just get a titanium frame? You might say, well, titanium is good, but I'll talk about that in a second. But something about steel, the right characteristics that I just love. It's just kind of sucks up the vibration a little bit better than any other material. Aluminium or aluminum, depending on where you're from. This is the most affordable lightweight option. If you're from places where there's pretty good road conditions, aluminium is a really good option. I really mean that. You don't have to dig too deep into your pockets, as I say. But aluminium frames can be harsh in rough terrain. They are so rigid that they just don't comply to any rough terrain. Because they're so rigid, they're prone to cracking. So, as I say, reputable brands won't have this issue. Well, not as much, they shouldn't. So if you're getting an aluminium bike, go for a proper brand. Next is carbon. We all know about carbon. Carbon has come a long way over the years and it's still improving. If having a lightweight bike is the most important thing to you, then carbon is probably the way to go. That's not to say it will always be a harsh ride. It all depends on what the bike was designed for. For example, a carbon race bike will be stiff everywhere. It'll be stiff as it can be and it'll be built for speed. But if you get a carbon bike that's designed for adventure riding, then it will be designed to maybe flex a little bit in the seat state, absorb some of that vibration. So as I said, check out carbon bikes too for adventure. I wouldn't just rule them out just yet. And then of course we have titanium, which is one of the most exotic materials we have on our list. It's light, strong and is comfortable. However, it does have its limitations. Titanium has a certain amount of flex, and it's this flex that gives it its smooth ride. However, if you try to make a titanium frame that's too light, it will, for lack of a better phrase, wobble a little bit on the road and feel a little bit unstable. So if you're getting a titanium bike, make sure, again, it's a reputable brand. There is also another myth that titanium frames will last forever. Now, it is true that they don't rust, but they will crack. Not saying they will crack, they can crack, just like any other frame. If you crash it, or if it's have any defects in the manufacturing process, it'll crack just like steel, just like aluminium. That being said, titanium is beautiful. You don't even need to paint it. The metal is usually left bare as it doesn't rust, and that's a little bit of a weight saving if that's what you're into. Okay, so the next thing we need to consider is tire width when choosing a frame head. This is probably the most important consideration you need to think about. This will depend on how adventurous you want to get. If riding on the road is all you ever want to do, then max 34mm tires will bring your area on anywhere. If you want to venture off-road, then you will need an even wider tire. You can even go for full-on 27.5 mountain bike tires if you want. Just make sure your frame will cope for whatever tires you might want to give it. What braking type should you get? There are two types of braking, rim brakes and disc brakes. Both have their pros and cons, which I will discuss below. But basically, if you're going to cycle off-road and damp conditions, then disc brakes will probably be a better choice. Rim brakes are the type that we all grew up with. Two pads rub against the rim of the wheel to slow you down. These work great in good conditions, but it will depend on the quality of the pads. When the weather turns bad, rim brakes can have an issue when trying to stop you, especially if there's excess water and grime stuck on your rim. Disc brakes have, as the name suggests, discs near the hub of the wheel. Let me see, my kid's back again. These can work better as they're further away from the road, so less water and dirt can go onto the actual disc itself. It works just pretty much on a friction basis. Just the caliper here. There's two calipers inside here. As you pull the brakes, the cable puts the two calipers together and squeeze against the disc, bringing you to a stop. These are cable activated disc brakes. They're fine for my kid. They're doing really good. He's only 6, but I've had cable disc brakes before. Fine at the start, but after a few thousand K, they're rubbish. I've nearly had a bad accident with a set of cable brakes before, but the hydraulic version is brilliant. There's serious stopping power. Bottom brackets. What type do you need, or what type do you want? This is another pretty important part of the bike. The bottom bracket is where your bearings are housed for your cranks. There are a wide variety of bottom brackets. I tend to cover everything you need to know when I talk about the group set. For now, all you need to know is if you want to have a screw-in or threaded bottom bracket or press fit. Obviously, the reason you need to choose this is because in the frame there has to be threads for a threaded bottom bracket, or if you want to press fit, then there'll be no threads, just the bottom brackets are squeezed into the frame. Which to choose, it's not really a deal breaker which one you get, although I do have my own personal preference, which I'll tell you now. If you want things to be as light as possible, then press fit is probably the way to go. However, they are harder to service, and I also have my own personal bad experience with them. If you have a carbon bike, then just know that they're gonna creak as you pedal. I have my Arbea, it's a brilliant bike, press fit bottom bracket, creaks like mad, drives me nuts. I'll not go on. I have my road bike, it's a Giant Defy, brilliant bike, absolutely. I spent days on that thing. But no matter what you do, you might be able to change the bottom brackets, take them out, grease them, put them back in, but eventually they're going to creak again, and you'll have to do that again, take them out, put them back. I will never get press fit bottom bracket again. Next is the headset, which is where the bearings go for your front fork and your steering system, basically. So a headset is a term given to the bearings which connect your frame to the fork. You can get the headset bearings as part of your frame, depending on or who you're buying it from. But it's good to know what sizes you need. Again, I'll go through this. I'm going to make a separate video on the headset and picking a handlebar for choosing a frame. You just need to know that there's a bearing on the top. Let me see, where's my kid's bike? There's a bearing in here and there's a bearing in here. So it's then two bearings that allow your forks to rotate and also keep it sturdy. Okay, so some headsets will have these here are integrated bearings, top and bottom. So we have, some frames might have an external bearing at the bottom, an internal at the top, or two externals. Some might have a wider or larger bearing at the bottom than the top. Just creates more stiffness. So which to choose? I'll try to answer now. Which to choose? Well, for now you don't really need to worry about it. It's just when you actually, if you have to buy headset bearings, that's when you need to get into it. So I do discuss this in the headset section, and I'm going to make a video of the same section where I talk about how to choose bearings and handlebars and stems and the steering system basically. So check that out. But for now, when you're just choosing a frame, as long as you get a fork that goes to the frame, which should happen anyway, should be fine. So now we've all the big things out of the way. Just other things you should consider, things like bottle mounts. So if you know we're going to be cycling long distances and in places where you might not be able to refill so often, you're going to need a lot of bottle mounts. So some bikes have bottle mounts in their frames, on the forks. Some have maybe one down by the bottom bracket, so it gives you another option. There's 3 on the frame, and some even have, I've seen some got some in the rear chainstay. So, seat stay. It's just letting you know there's options there, and have a look around. Make sure you have enough. There's no point in getting a frame that only has 1 or 2 options for bottle cages, and you need much more. Rack mounts. If adventure racing is your thing, then you may not need these, as you might just get away with a large saddlebag, frame bag, or even handlebar bag. However, if you're planning on carrying a lot of cargo, then you're going to need rack mounts to carry your panniers safely. Fender mounts or mudguard mounts. If you're planning on fitting fenders, then make sure your frame includes the eyelets needed to attach them. You can get fenders that attach to your seat stays or seat posts, but they won't be nearly as reliable as a screw-on. They always move or wobble, especially in rough terrain. Or even worse, I had a set of, I can't remember the name of them now, but they connected to my seat stay and the top of, where is that? I don't know if you can see this. Bring it closer. So, look here. I had these Velcro strips. These Velcro strips are where my our fender would stick onto, and it would come across here from down here. But you see what happened here? See this? The bloody fender, with all the vibration of the road, it actually wore away part of my seat set, which is not ideal. It's my carbon. So be careful of that. What axle type should you consider? Right, so this is fairly important. There are different ways to attach up your wheels to your frame, depending on the type of hub you use. The traditional 9mm quick release is still very common with rim brakes. However, if you're planning to use disc brakes, then you will probably have a through axle on at least your front fork, if not both. The ride quality also increases because the whole handling just feels more solid. Through axles at the front or the rear can be different sizes. Can be 12 normal sizes for 12mm and 15mm. And with the bigger diameters giving obviously more rigidity. What size of seat post do you need? Seat post sizes vary between bike manufacturers. The reason for this is because traditionally the more expensive frames have thinner walls, meaning the internal diameter is bigger. You see the outer diameter is normally kept the same because of the front derailleur is, traditionally would have been clamped onto it, so that diameter would try to be kept the same. Nowadays, the trend is to use a larger diameter seat post, especially in frames designed to be used in rough terrain. This is to give the seat post more support so the frame won't crack when you hit a large bump. However, if these larger seat posts are stiffer, they can be rougher ride, you know, obviously stiffer on the saddles, it's going to send more vibrations up your ass. Me personally, I like the cylinder seat post, so it flexes slightly and absorbs some of that vibration. So now on to the group set, and we have to decide how it would be attached to your bike. So in different places. We have a few little things we need to be aware of at the moment. When you're picking a frame, you just need to consider, okay? So first thing I want to say is there's lots of different group sets out there. There's fixies, there's one bys, there's tons. I'm not going to be through them all now. But this guide is to help you build an adventure bike. So, like, there are some guys out there who have adventure bikes that are fixies, and there's not many of you. So I'm just going to assume that you're going to at least have a rear derailleur, so you can change gear. For this, you are going to need something for the rear derailleur to hang on. So just make sure your frame has a rear hanger. Some frames have it built on as part of the frame. Most have a detachable hanger. And they say it's detachable because this is considered a weak point in the frame. If you happen to crash or hit a rock or whatever happens, if the derailleur gets caught in something and gets ripped off, the derailleur hanger is designed to snap, which will save your frame and your derailleur. That just means that you're going to need to carry on with you in case it ever breaks, so always carry a rear derailleur hanger. For the front derailleur, it's slightly different. There's two different ways of attaching the front derailleur to your bike. There's the clamp on, which is basically a clamp around your seat tube. If you have an odd shaped seat tube, then you're probably a brace on derailleur, which is basically a threaded section where you can screw the front derailleur into. For now, all you should know is if you want a front derailleur and the seat tube isn't round, then make sure you have a brace on thread. Some manufacturers are making frames that are only used for one bike, so no front derailleur. So be careful there, or you won't have the option. For now, these are the only things you need to consider as part of picking a frame and picking a group set. Another thing that you might want to look at is if you want internal or external cables. Brake and gear cables can be routed inside of the frame. Not only is this more aerodynamic, but it also looks pretty cool. That being said, you should be aware of the downside to having cables routed internally. And having to fix a broken cable can be tricky enough, but if you have to feed it through a frame, then it can be very frustrating, to say the least. They can also rattle a little bit, depending on how it's set up. If it's not put through the frame correctly, then yeah, the cable can rattle inside of your frame, which obviously can be annoying some. I think that's all for the frame for now.